famous British philosopher Bertrand Russell states, "The more intense has been the religion of any period, and the more profound has been the dogmatic belief, the greater has been the cruelty, and the worse has been the state of affairs." Albert Einstein, scientist, states, "I cannot imagine a God who rewards and punishes the objects of his creation, whose purposes are modeled after our own. A God, in short, who is but a reflection of human frailty. Neither can I believe that the individual survives the death of his body, although feeble souls harbor such thoughts through fear or ridiculous egotism."
Hello and welcome again to Atheists of Florida Forum. I'm Dr. Albert E. Lyngzeidelson, chairperson for Atheists of Florida, host and moderator. And today we're very, very pleased to bring you an exceptionally interesting program entitled Faith Healing and Other Fraud. And first of all, I'd like to introduce our honored guests, Mr. James Randi, whose bio is so prolific that it would take up the whole show. I will just say he's an author, a lecturer, an investigator, and a magician. However, we will not impose upon you to do any magic today.
Thank you.
And welcome to the show. Also, we have Jim Strayer, who's a natural sciences lecturer. And Jim Strayer will be our second guest. And welcome to the show, Jim. And last but not least, we are once again blessed with the presence of Brent Yachi. He is a doctoral student and Ph.D. at FSU, is that correct?
Yes.
And also the, if I read correctly, president of the Humanists of the South Coast. Excuse me, Sun Coast.
Yes, and a faith healer.
And a faith healer. Okay. Well, to get us started, Mr. Randi or James, I have had many, many students come up to me in my lectures in philosophy and when we talk about God and religion, and they say, you know, I'm not religious at all, but there has to be something to the occult, because after all, here's Nostradamus, and Nostradamus made all of these very specific predictions and they all came true, so there must be some kind of spiritual dimension which some people are privy to. And I'm always rather baffled as to how to answer these students who are not at all religious, but they still seem somewhat convinced or suspicious that there's a supernatural realm, and the predictions of Nostradamus accurately reflect this realm. Now, I noticed you just wrote a book on this topic called The Mask of Nostradamus. And could you perhaps enlighten us as to how accurate are his predictions, if ever? And why is there such fascination with this man?
Well, first of all, I'd like to know why the audience is not blessed with my presence. Brent, you see, we were blessed with the presence of... I'd like the audience to also be blessed with my presence.
Well, we are equally blessed with your presence.
Very good. Now I feel better. I wrote the Mask of Nostradamus because I came upon some interesting things about this gentleman who has been dead for 4 centuries now and still has a great influence on the belief structure of many people with the occult and the supernatural. The unfortunate fact of the matter is that poor old Michel de Notre Dame made 103 predictions, and only 103 predictions, in which he actually named a person, a place, or a time, a date, that is. And on all of those 103, he was wrong, absolutely dead wrong. It's like yes or no, absolutely wrong. The rest of them are also very vague, that you can interpret them almost any way you want. But the interesting thing about him, 2 things. First of all, I call it the Mask of Nostradamus because he was actually a heretic living in medieval France. Now, in the 16th century, that's when the Inquisition was doing its work, and he was from a converted Jewish family. The name was Gassonet originally, and therefore he was under suspicion anyway of being religious, but not in the right direction. He wasn't a Christian. He became a Christian through this conversion of the whole family and took the name Nostradamus, Our Lady, which couldn't be more French, couldn't be more Catholic. And yet he was secretly a heretic. Now, that was not revealed until my book was published. I managed in the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris to come up with 15 letters written by him to his clients and from the clients to him in medieval Latin, which I certainly do not read, but I had a competent translation of it done. And he was an astrologer, you see, a physician and an astrologer. If you were a physician in the 16th century, you had to first be an astrologer because all medical diagnosis was done not by looking at the patient, but by looking at the stars. It would tell you about that patient if you knew the birth date and all the geographical information. So he had clients all over Europe who paid him great sums of money to cast horoscopes for them. Well, along the way I found out that he didn't cast the horoscopes. He had that done by somebody else because he apparently wasn't smart enough to do it. But he did do the interpretation of them. And these 15 letters are really amusing because one of them starts off a letter to him from a fellow in Mainz, Germany. It starts off something to the effect, "Oh, most esteemed, divinely inspired, and very wise prophet, you to whom all the secrets of the stars and the heavens are transparent as a simple sheet of glass. Where's my horoscope? I already paid you for it. Now where is the damn horoscope?" And he goes on like this, cursing away at Nostradamus after building him up in the first paragraph. And Nostradamus answers, he says, "You see, you're a barbarian. You don't understand, really. These are all poetic things." The man complains that, oh, Nostradamus tells him things like the leopard flies through the sky and the king is beneath the earth on the sacred river. He said, "That doesn't tell me anything. I'm a miner. I want to know where to dig for gold. Tell me where to dig for gold." And he says, "Oh, but it's all in there if you look hard enough for it." And that's what Nostradamus is all about. If you look hard enough, you will find any kind of a message, like a Rorschach test.
Well, on that note, if I can open the discussion a little bit further, Jim, is astrology scientifically testable? I have heard that there's two French statisticians who have argued that it is a scientifically testable hypothesis, yet I find if I read astrology columns that the captions are specific enough as to seem to be talking about my life, yet general enough so as not to be conclusively falsifiable. And it seems to me many educated people, including, if I may say so, our former President Reagan and his First Lady, were quite under the influence of astrology.
Astrology isn't quite as accurate as fortune cookies. If you eat Chinese a lot, you'll find out an awful lot more about yourself than you will from astrology. One of my favorite people is Carl Sagan. And he's a highly respected scientist and one that communicates with the normal folks quite well, I think. And he just blankly says astrology is a fraud. And I think that's pretty easy to see. All you have to do is pick up a paper from two different papers, even from the same city, and both astrologers will be giving different predictions. If you pick them up from different cities, it's even worse. Everything that they put in there is just so basic and liable to happen to anybody. You know, you're going to take a trip, you're going to meet someone.
One experiment I recall is the following. They took astrological predictions, hundreds of them, and they had them randomly assigned to various people. And then they gave them a questionnaire and asked them how accurate was this prediction about you. And something like 70 to 80% said yes, that it seemed to be uncannily accurate, despite the fact that it was a completely randomly assigned caption. And Brent, are you familiar with that study by any chance?
Well, actually, I saw James Randi do that exact same thing almost on television on a special that was produced for Nova, where he handed out a very vaguely worded prediction, and the students, most of them said, "Yes, this describes me accurately." And I thought it was hilarious because he had them pass it to each other, and they all had the exact same thing. But it described all of them accurately because it was worded very vaguely. And words have a lot to do with this, semantics. That's one of the reasons why when you introduced me, I mentioned that I am a faith healer. Now, of course, faith healing can be taken in different means. As an active atheist, I'm a faith healer because our society is sick, and I am healing society from the sickness that is caused by faith. I'm trying to substitute, instead of faith, critical thinking, rational discussion, evidence, and science. But I'm healing a sickness that's caused by faith. But that's not what most people think of when you say you're a faith healer. And a lot of faith healing and astrology and predictions all has to do with twisting the language around in such a way that anyone can claim to be predicting almost anything because they're interpreting it in such a way that, well, no one else would interpret this way normally, but it is. And a good example of that actually was something that happened recently here in Florida. You may have heard of Mike Diana and the Boiled Angel case. One of the prosecutors said that it was not Mike Diana having these thoughts, these so supposedly obscene thoughts, these ideas, that was
violating the First Amendment. It was his publication of those, his letting them out into the actual public, into public view. And you could say, well, in other words, what the lawyer is trying to do is say that, well, as long as no one has telepathy and no one can read his thoughts and he can think whatever he wants, but as soon as he lets it out, and he's saying that this is what the First Amendment was intended to protect. Now, any rational, normal person who reads the First Amendment is going to say, well, no, it wasn't intended just to protect people's thoughts.
Right.
It was intended to protect publication and speech. But a twisted lawyer can twist even the First Amendment to mean anything he wants it to mean if he's backed by the right people politically.
Well, speaking of twisting things around, if I may return to James Randi, many students of mine in my class who are born-again Christians have claimed that one of the things that convinced them of the truth of Christianity is the absolutely spellbinding accuracy of the predictions of the Bible. And what I'd like to do in posing this question to you is in comparing the quatrains of Nostradamus to biblical predictions. Do you see a rough parity there? Is one more accurate than the other? Because it seems to me, as not an expert, that they seem both to be the types of predictions which only in retrospect would seem to ring true based upon our own subjective interpretation. And have you had any experience with people claiming that biblical predictions are uncannily accurate and therefore must be true?
Yes, many, many times. First of all, I'd point out that in the predictions of Nostradamus, the interpreters are the real sinners, if we can recognize sin as such. What they do is they try very hard to make it correspond. Some quatrain or two lines from one and two from another, written years apart. They put those together and they say, you see, he even wrote them years apart, but when you put them together, they fit. Of course, they can be made to fit. And in some cases, there are popular quatrains that have been used to explain as many as 5 or 6 different things. There's one particular one, which I describe in the book, which is supposed to be Napoleon going to Elba, supposed to be the downfall of Nixon at the Watergate affair, and is also supposed to be the close of the Civil War in the United States. Now, it can't possibly be all 3, and probably isn't any of the 3, because it describes an event that happened in Nostradamus' own time. Now, we have a parallel in that with the Bible. What is Armageddon? What does Armageddon mean to you, for example? What do you think of when you think of Armageddon?
I would think of the end of the world, an absolute cataclysm of
Right.
political, geopolitical, natural breakdown.
Okay, that's what it means to most people who don't really know much about the subject. I mean, because you haven't looked into it. I hadn't looked into it until I did this book on Nostradamus. It turns out that Armageddon is actually a location in Israel where a very large, great, very bloody battle took place. And what's in the Bible is a description of that battle. It's already taken place, so we don't have to worry about it, friends. We don't have to worry about Armageddon coming again. It's a physical location in the Bible where a famous battle took place. And I like one of the descriptions in the Bible. I'm a nuisance this way. I sit down and actually do calculations, you see. It says that blood will be up to the bridle of the horse. So I went out to a local horse farm where I live in Plantation, and I figured out the average height of a bridle on the average horse. And then I figured out, and I looked at a topological map of that area in Israel, and it's in a large valley. And I calculated approximately the volume of that valley, and assuming that you stopped up both ends of the valley, and then the average amount of blood that there is in a person of warrior size, assuming that all the blood came out of them at one time, I mean, this gets to be a little silly. You'd have to have something like 40 million people all die instantaneously, been drained of all of their blood in order for that valley to fill up to the height of a horse's bridle. So there's something wrong with biblical prophecy.
Well, another thing that I've pointed out about a biblical prophecy is I often point out to fundamentalist students, how come the Bible doesn't say anything about dinosaurs? How could Noah miss out on a 100-ton lizard? In other words, where are the dinosaurs?
You would notice if they're on board.
You would notice these things.
When one moved around, everyone would hold on a little tighter, I think. You would probably notice they're not there. No, biblical prophecy is always vague. All of these prophecies, Jean Dixon's prophecies, my goodness, there's a big winner, and she says she gets it directly from God. She says astrology helps along the way. But in a 5-year period, all of her prophecies were written down. In a 5-year period, that is the published ones. Of 364 predictions, she was right on 4. That's slightly better than 1%, and one of those predictions was great medical breakthroughs this year. Now, how could she possibly have known that? I mean, that takes a gift from God to know that there would be great medical breakthroughs this year, as there are every year. But 4 out of 364?
Something like what you would expect by chance, I would think.
By chance, and in fact, I think she could do a bit better than that if she used the Chinese fortune cookie that Jim recommends.
I'm glad you brought up Noah, actually, because someone recently gave a talk about the 2 stories of Noah that are in the Bible. There's one that's the Lord, and then there's another one that uses the term God, I think it is. But there are 2 separate stories, and they contradict each other. They give different sizes, different measurements, different times, different people involved. And I have often thought that one of the reasons why the Bible is written the way it is, in that it has so many contradictions within it, is because you can always, no matter what happens, point to one of those contradictions and say, well, this is what was meant. Forget the other one. This is what was meant. It's like an old game that I learned about when I was studying. I took a securities licensing exam at one time. Never actually went into the field, but I wanted to know a little bit more than the average person about investing. And there's a scam that goes on in the securities industry where you call up, say, 100 people, and you tell 50 of them that a certain stock is going to go up, 50 of them it's going to go down. You tell them, don't give you any money yet, but just do, you know, think about this, check the stock tomorrow. Well, if the stock goes up, you call that 50. If the stock goes down, you call the other 50. You call them and you say, well, I made one right prediction, but I don't want you to invest with me on that. I'm going to make a couple of more. And you do this several times. Each time you only call the half that you were right on. And you get down to where you've made 4 predictions
That are correct.
that are correct in a row, and this person thinks that you have the eye of God on you because you've made 4 correct predictions in a row. And of course, they don't know about the other 80-some% of the people who you are wrong over and over again with. They just know about
The ones,
that they told you.
Well,
So-
well, preying on people's gullibility, I'd like to turn the focus of attention upon faith healing, which is, after all, this program. I teach a course in critical thinking, and one of the things I came up with is mention of James Randi is that often a TV evangelist would say, Lord, I see a family having marital problems, and I see somebody else with a peptic ulcer, and I see someone else with a drinking problem. And the law of large numbers dictates if you have 1 million viewers, inevitably there will be several hundred in each case that will have specifically these problems. And the person who sees this on TV says, oh my God, they know about me. This guy has a divine connection. And so if I could, I'd like to focus my attention upon that. James, are there specific ploys or cons that TV evangelists use more often than others, or shall we say, that are especially convincing, like the one I just mentioned, that you know of?
Well, Pat Robertson, who at one time was very big in faith healing, he sort of segued out of that and got more like Billy Graham along the way. And I have a tape at home, videotape of him standing up in front of an audience, and roughly it goes like this. The Lord tells me there are 42 people in this audience now that have diabetes. Now, as an aside, I'm no longer Pat Robertson for a moment. Diabetes cannot be cured. It can be treated. There are all kinds of oral and injectable medicines, such as insulin, that can control diabetes very effectively, and you can live a rich, long, useful life. And you're never cured of it. You have to live with it all of your life. Well, to go back to Robertson now, here he is standing on the stage saying 42 people, and he's got a vast audience, a whole stadium full of people. And he says, let me see your hands. Okay, I see the hands, I see the hands. All right, you were healed, you were healed. There's one. There are 42 people. There are 2, 4, 6, 8, 12, and he goes all the way up to 38, 39, 40, 41. Where's the, there you are, 42, as if it was exactly the number. And of course, there are many more than 42 hands are being held up. But he counts down to 42 and he says, praise Jesus, you are healed. Now, breaking away. What happens to those people? Do they throw away their medication? In many cases, the faith healers say, yes, throw away your medication. God has healed you. With God, all things are possible. If they go home and throw away their medication, they're going to die. There's no 2 ways about it. They will die. And I'm sure that it has happened. Ask Pat Robertson. What happened to those 42 people? He has no idea what happened to them. I have an idea that they weren't healed. I have a very strong suspicion that they weren't. And some of them may very well have died. But Pat Robertson doesn't seem to care very much. He simply says, you're healed, go home, that's it.
Why is Pat Robertson not sued for faith healing malpractice?
Well, it has happened. Not with Pat Robertson, that I know of specifically, but in one case I know that Robertson actually showed a videotape on one of his programs of a man for whom they had prayed, and it showed him with the tears coming down his face saying, oh, I am healed, I am healed. And at the time that tape was broadcast, Pat Robertson did know, and the entire staff knew, since it had been made several weeks before, that man had since died of that ailment, and yet he still broadcast a tape because it was very strong. It was strong, but it was strictly a scam. Now, these things do happen, and in writing my book, The Faith Healers, I examined 104 cases of people who either said they had been healed or about whom it was said that they were healed. 104 cases, and they only belong to 3 classes. First, people who never had the disease in the first place because they couldn't produce any medical evidence of it whatsoever. They just thought they had this specific disease, whatever it might be. Second, people who still had the disease and weren't willing to admit it. And third, people who had died from the disease. And investigating the data for that particular book, over 2¼ years I spent at it. On one case, I actually walked up onto the porch of this home near St. Louis, and I walked up onto the porch, knocked on the door, and as I was knocking on the door, they opened the door, and out came the man on a beer and a body bag. He had just died. Now, come on, 104 cases, none of whom were healed. Oh, there may be a couple of cases where there was a healing. But that can be also ascribed to spontaneous remission, which happens.
On that note, I was in another television show some time ago where the debate was about Christian Science, which is an oxymoron in my estimate. But the advocate for the Christian Science community, who was a very, very articulate man, said, we have documented cases of people with terminal illness who have recovered upon being prayed over, right? And my students often bring this up, and I always ask them the following question. How many cases do you have where people with terminal illnesses were prayed over and nevertheless died?
That's right.
And if you look at those cases, what you will probably find is that the persons who did in fact recover are no greater than what you would expect to go into spontaneous remission, which is a minuscule of percentage in any cases. Well, on that note, perhaps, Jim, you could interject something here. Is it true that it could be argued, perhaps, that with faith healing, there's at least an appreciable placebo effect in some cases? That if the person truly believes that Jesus or the divine angel or whatnot is now going to heal them, that in fact that positive mental attitude could facilitate their recovery? Because some people have argued that even if there is nothing to it, we could perhaps still let it go because there's a placebo effect.
Well, you know, I think that's kind of a cop-out. The placebo effect may be there sometimes, but we use it so often. We always say, well, this could explain it. When this has come up in my classes, I've tried to just hit it right head on by saying to them, well, you're talking about faith healing, so why don't you do something for me? Go to the dictionary and look up faith, look up miracle, look up religion, and then look up superstition. And they're all 4 going to have basically the same definition in the dictionary. Now, if you want to change the dictionary or the meaning that would give faith to make it more important or more scientific than superstition, then you've got to work with the whole society. But faith healing is a superstition. Religion is superstition. Miracles are superstition. We've either got to change our definitions or we've got to begin looking at things more realistic, or the way things really are happening. And we have too many outs for those people, like the placebo effect. Or I think it's much better, is what James said. They didn't have the condition in the first place.
Right.
Our society is always so willing to jump on something like, well, it's psychosomatic. And I agree with psychosomatic illnesses, but it isn't something that we can use to explain all of these situations.
I think also it could well be argued that there's something very morally objectionable occurring here, because what many of these charlatans do is they prey in the sense of victimize people's desperation. A person who's dying will try damn near anything, and what they often do is in fact exploit and manipulate these very real fears and desperation people have for their own greed and profit.
And to give you a good example, now you mustn't think that this thing doesn't pay off well. At the time that I exposed Peter Popoff, the evangelist who ended up he had a transmitter and a receiver in his ear. He was picking up information that was gathered by his wife to apparently prove that he had the Word of God going for them. I exposed him on the Carson Show, as a matter of fact. Now, this man is taking people away from their medicine, and in Texas, we went up on the stage and we gathered the medicine that had been thrown away, and there was insulin in there, and nitroglycerin pills, and that sort of thing. But remember, Jim, there's another thing that should be made clear, I think, that is in these placebo effects. The placebo effects are only effective against psychosomatic illnesses. I mean, after all, if you have a broken leg or something like that, no amount of faith or placebo is going to cure that broken leg.
I would like to mention something else, too, that's especially dangerous about this. It's not exactly a placebo effect, but I've recently completed some work on a study on pain. And pain reception, or pain, how you sense pain, is all internal. It's all in your brain. And a lot of times people can, through their beliefs and thoughts, they can disconnect the pain signals that are coming into their brain, or ignore them, in the same way that a painkiller works in a way. I mean, that's what how a painkiller works. It confuses the signals or deadens your brain to those signals. Well, they can do that mentally.
Well, meditation is often...
Meditation, okay, is a good example. There are pain clinics that do this for people. However, people who have a real serious illness, a broken leg or something of that matter, it may hide the pain, but the illness is still there. And that makes it even worse, because they think they're cured, but they're not.
So you're exacerbating the condition.
You're actually making the condition worse.
Well, if I may make a concluding note on that, Scottish philosopher David Hume pointed out in his Essays on Natural Religion, posthumously published, that a law of nature is an observation which has an immense amount of empirical support, which has never been falsified. Whereas a miracle, by definition, is a suspension of a law of nature. A rational person is the one that bases their beliefs upon inductive evidence and observation. Vis-a-vis, or ergo, by conclusion, a person who believes in faith healing or miracles is a person who is as irrational by definition as they could possibly be. And it is this irrationality which is being exploited and manipulated by faith healers. On that note, thank you again for being with us, and please, if you are interested, do send away for our newsletter with this Atheists of Florida. We'd be happy to send it to you if you write to the address at the closing credits, and our pamphlet, The Truth About Atheism. We'll be happy to send that to you also. Once again, thank you for being with us.